Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's Tech Talk, Web3 technologies and their impact on industries, insights from insiders. As you can see here, we have a wonderfully diverse set of insightful speakers to look at different aspects of what is really one of the hotter emerging areas of tech today. A big thank you to Accenture for sponsoring the Tech Talk series. Let's pull up the etiquette slide. The main thing I just want to emphasize, so we'll make this interactive through the Q&A tab. So as you're listening, if you've got questions, throw them in the tab. I got it open, vote them up and down, and I will try and work that into the conversation with our great panelists here today. Where does this Tech Talk come from? Well, actually, Digital at INSEAD, in addition to doing these Tech Talks, does a bunch of other things. Next slide, please, Sandra. Does a bunch of other things, including sponsoring MBA students over the summer to go out and check out different tech topics. They usually spend about 4 weeks preparing a trek, 4 weeks on the road, finally now post-COVID, not on Zoom, actually out there and probing different elements of tech ecosystem. So one great group last summer was on Web3 and metaverse, and we're drawing on many of the insights and speakers they met. But we'd also have teams out in Western Australia looking at the ecosystems there, tech in Canada, healthcare, ed tech, and even a group looking at innovative approaches to new product development. So that's where this comes from. And so one of the things we wanted to take 5 to 7 minutes with one of the MBA students, Cameron, to kick things off, really, because obviously Web3, we want to lay some foundations out there so then we can dive in with our speakers. Cameron, please, over to you. What is Web3?
Hi, everybody. I think can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So as Peter mentioned before, I'm an MBA student. I graduated in December of last year. And me, as well as 2 other people on my team, we did our summer startup on Web3, specifically the metaverse. And so that kind of leads me to the first slide here. Basically, one of the things that we had to do when we were thinking about who to discuss with, and also it was further reinforced post of discussion, is sort of what defines a metaverse. So I've split it here into 2 buckets of things that a metaverse absolutely has to have versus things that a metaverse doesn't necessarily need, but are oftentimes associated with it. The things that the metaverse needs, for one thing, the main thing is it's 3-dimensional. The difference between Web3 versus Web2 is that in Web3, there is a sort of 3-dimensional aspect as you are traversing through a digital space. I've got some examples here of different metaverses that are kind of fall within this definition. The second thing is that there needs to be some level of human immersion. That is generally kept up, or at least upheld, by the idea of a 3-dimensional space. But also, as the metaverses get more and more complex, that level of immersion is obviously going to increase. The third and final thing that my team, as well as many of the people we spoke to, agreed is that there does need to be an ability to interact with the environment and or other users. I think all of the metaverses on this slide here all have that in common, that you're in some way able to interact with other people, whether it be in a game like Fortnite or through creation in Minecraft and the sandbox and Roblox. But then also with Ready Player One, the idea was it was just a completely separate world, right? When it gets to things that maybe are oftentimes associated with the metaverse, but we didn't find were as important with I guess, being a metaverse. Most people think of full immersion as sort of something that is required for the metaverse, but we didn't agree with that. Again, harkening back to the example of Ready Player One, it was amazing how often this movie or book came up in our discussions, because it's sort of seen as this like final end all be all. That's like the ultimate goal of where we want to go. But the truth is that, I mean, unless you're considering the absolute final end product to be the only true sort of metaverse, then it's really not something that is required to be a metaverse. Second one, which is a bit controversial in some circles within Web3, is that it has to be built on blockchain. That's one thing that we found to be, frankly, just not true. There are many people that we spoke to that actually were building their own small scale metaverses on traditional sort of Web2 technology. It's great for things like ownership within the metaverse and that kind of thing, but in reality, it's not something that's required to build the metaverse. And then the third and final thing, this is kind of groups in with the first one, excuse me, is that full integration with the other metaverses, or this one overarching metaverse, is something that is required for it to be a metaverse. That's not really something that we found to be true. It's great. It's something that a lot of companies and a lot of organizations are working for. But in reality, it's not something that has to be done in order for it to be considered a metaverse. With that being said, there's some roadblocks with achieving these sort of lofty goals of full immersion and full integration with other metaverses. And the next slide is going to show us pretty much the main one. So the importance of hardware is really cannot be understated. I have everyone in this slide underlined, bolded, and italicized for a reason. And it's not an exaggeration that I think we spoke with over our 4-week trek 30 to 35 companies, or maybe closer to 32. And quite literally every single person, every single entity that we talked to mentioned that hardware was the main roadblock for mass adoption. And it's for two main reasons. One, current technology can't really be used by people for extended periods of time. Specifically, this one's kind of specific to the headsets, but that's also the main component of immersion. Frankly, these headsets make a lot of people dizzy, a little bit ill after, in many cases, it's as quick as 20 or 30 minutes, because you're essentially tricking your brain into thinking you're somewhere you're not. But also, with that being said, you're not going to get a really high level of immersion until the technology really improves. And then the second thing that is really kind of hindered by the current hardware right now is that environments are pretty limited. I mean, I think everybody's seen Minecraft and all that stuff. It's not necessarily the highest resolution. And one of the main issues, I guess, with developing hardware, there are two things. One, hardware has a really long development cycle, and two, it's substantially less profitable than software. So much so that hardware companies actually have a different exit strategy than software companies. Next slide, please. So with that being said, who is pushing the boundaries? Like it or not, a lot of the big tech players, the ones who are really going to be pushing the boundaries and who currently are pushing the boundaries, we have companies like Apple, HTC, Meta, Samsung, among others. These are the ones that are really pushing hardware. And it's entirely because, frankly, they have deep pockets. They have the money to invest on hardware. They can afford to have, I guess, substantially, or not substantially, but lower profits than, say, a pure software company or a startup that's going to have to pay back VC investors or something like that. On top of that, a lot of them are hardware focused. I mean, Apple has a substantial software arm, but at the end of the day, they produce new iPhones. HTC, same thing. Samsung, same thing. Meta is a bit different of a case, but we can lump them in because they're also the one who have a big vision. And because of this, they have this capability. They have the deep pockets to be able to do it. But then also they have a really wide reach, which means that they can create essentially large scale metaverses more easily, or develop the tools that reach a wider audience more easily. And as a result, they're able to reach a really broad audience, which is going to help with mass adoption. Next slide, please. So with that being said, what is the metaverse today? Pragmatism has effectively created the miniverse. So instead of this very large metaverse that encompasses the world kind of a deal, companies are working with the tools they have to create miniverses. And many of those are purpose-built. So not necessarily a giant game or a sandbox that you can just run around and do whatever you want, but think of walking into a store in the virtual world. And spatial computing is also being used to solve problems now. We have two companies here that are two of our panelists are involved in. Some are using spatial computing for telemedicine, so metaverses for telemedicine. People are using using it to create training platforms for large companies. There's quite a list of I guess applications that we're using with current technology today. So that's those are some of the key findings of I guess what I did over this past summer. And with that being said, I'll give it over to you.
Great. I just quick, were you glad that you did the summer startup tour?
I was very glad. It was really cool. Specifically, we did ours, like I said, on the metaverse, and it's a really sort of it's an ecosystem that's really in its infancy, and it was an opportunity to really see something really starting from the ground up. Which is something that I don't think a lot of people have ever gotten the chance to do. So I was really happy that I chose to do it.
All right, thank you for kicking us off. What I'm going to do is I'll bring each of the panelists out one at a time, have a first dialogue with them, and then we'll bring big free for all with everyone. Hey, Emma, if you could join us first. Emma is the CEO and co-founder of Warpin. So a strategic partner to brands. Think about H&M, Disney, IKEA, that are really wanting to enter this sort of VR, AR platforms and really try and create brand value there, content distribution context. So Emma, if you could maybe just kick us off when you're talking with brands, what kind of benefits are they looking to derive from VR and AR platforms? How are you guiding them?
Well, I think to start off with, we can start by saying that a lot of customers are really realizing that you need some type of metaverse strategy, depending on what type of company you are, of course. So we focus on two different tracks. So whereas their return on investment now in these technologies is in training and education, for example. So we have built a software platform where it's easy to scale and distribute your own training. You can save up to 80% of your cost, but also skip those really boring Zoom calls when you're talking into a black hole kind of thing. But we're also building augmented reality where right now you can tell a story, you can create a whole concept around something. Example for IKEA that we did just now, where you engage in the store, where you can find new ways of engaging with the client and getting new data, obviously. So we're doing a lot of different things.
Actually, so interesting you bring up the education case. So actually, INSEAD, we've built over a dozen sort of VR cases. It's great. I definitely agree with what Cameron says. The hardware is a pain. Getting 80 people in a classroom all on a VR headset is a bit of a pain point. For you and your work with these big brands, what kind of challenges come up as you look to execute on the strategies, and how does Warpin help address them?
Well, I think to your point, of course, the hardware is a problem. I mean, we are in the beginning of this technological renaissance that I like to call it. And I mean, I almost want to change the word metaverse or Web 3.0 to like reality plus, because it's going from, to the point that we've been speaking about before, going from having a 2D presence into a 3D presence. So a lot of the challenges is, of course, when you're scaling, you need hardware that is suitable. So we work with all the different headsets, depending on what type of project that we're doing. Is it a very high end with the journalists, then we may use HoloLens or Magic Leap to create a great experience. And to then scale it at the moment, then we're using cell phones or iPads. I think we're all waiting for the iPhone moment. I don't know if Apple will be the one releasing that as well. But what we're really helping them with is to strategize and to find behaviors that they can learn from today.
Yeah, actually, what are you seeing in terms of interest levels? So on the one hand, we had all the crypto issues, which kind of pushed people into Web3 as maybe a better label. At the same time, we had Zuckerberg and Facebook doing the whole meta thing, but then that's got some pushback, obviously. Everyone's still waiting for the Apple moment. What are you seeing in terms of, corporate interest levels?
Well, I think that the corporate interest level has really risen. When I started this company back in 2016, it felt like I was going around with a futuristic machine, right? But now we're talking to members of the board of big corporations, really figuring out how to not get to get ahead, but not to get behind. Because I think the majority of all companies at the moment feel that you have to look at these different technologies if you are going to be business crucial in a couple of years.
Great. And are they more in a sort of test and learn mindset? Or are they actually looking to scale up big things yet?
Well, I think that when you're doing campaigns or when you're doing projects within the metaverse or Web 3.0, you have to decide in the beginning what you want out of it. A lot of our clients want return on investment right now, then we focus on that. And a big majority of the companies look at, you have 6,000 people that need reskilling or upskilling. By the year 2025, 50% of every human will be needing reskilling and upskilling. So those are problems that we need to solve. So, I mean, if you have virtual reality adopted within your company, instead of having these Zoom calls, you can actually meet and collaborate in digital spaces. So I think that it's actually solving a lot of the problems at the moment.
Great, thank you, Emma. We'll come back. Let's bring Bryn out. So Bryn, Chief of Strategy and Business Development at Proximie. So again, very different organization. So you guys enable hospitals, surgeon, medical device companies to really actually capture operating room data, share information from anywhere, and then generate new insights on that. Okay, what does that mean? Can you tell us a little more about the actual solutions you offer? And just your view on digital health technology and making it more affordable and impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for inviting me to be part of it. Cameron, a pleasure to work with you last summer. So congratulations on the work that you did. And just a note as well, I heard Emma say she founded the company in 2016, and Proximie was founded back in 2016 by Nadine Haram. So I don't know what was happening back then, but it also makes me think of how many overnights it takes to become an overnight success. There's a lot of hard work and graft that's gone on. And certainly on our behalf, I'm sure it's the same across the board. So from a Proximie standpoint, yeah, absolutely right. We're a software-first health technology platform that's deployed into operating rooms and interventional suites globally to enable experts to connect and interact using tools like augmented reality, annotations on the screen, image overlays, and make it a rich learning environment that has high-quality audio and visual to enable people to be able to share that information. And again, as Emma just said, there's a huge deficit in terms of the needs in the workforce of healthcare, aging population, more new technologies coming out, more complicated ways of treatment. So for us all, the benefit of all is having that access to great care. Now, just on a note of sort of data point, there's currently 5 billion people in the world without access to safe surgery. 18.6 million people die every year because they don't have access. That's more than TB, HIV, and malaria combined. And the other point is this isn't not a problem somewhere else, it's a problem everywhere. And it's something that exists as much in London as it does in New York, as it does in Madrid, as it does in Sydney, as it does in the global south. So having access to that care. And for us, that's our guiding light and our founding principles to not only look at the mission and how we can help people have access to better care by connecting experts together, recording that information, sharing that information data, and using all of the technology that's available in a very pragmatic way to ensure it's scalable and accessible, so works at low bandwidth and doesn't rely on the hardware that are already being discussed as a limiting factor. So we use hardware that's off the shelf, cameras that pre-exist, Logitech webcams, anything that's currently in sight to make it accessible and affordable for everyone to have access to.
So give maybe just a concrete sense of something you're super proud of in terms of solutions you've delivered.
Well, two come straight to mind. I think there's two elements where one, access to safe surgical care in Kenya, for example. I'll give you one in the global south and one in the global north. But one in the global south in Kenya is where women don't have access to safe surgical care for cesarean sections. So currently in Kenya, when the surgeon isn't available, there's very few surgeons. They have primary care physicians doing cesarean sections, and the mortality rate of mothers is very high. It's in the high over 50%. If you take that down a level, then what happens is the mothers won't go to areas of care to have that. So they try and get treatment in their homes or in their villages as such, and they end up dying and the patient dies. So the outcomes are really poor. So we worked with the J&J Foundation and Johns Hopkins in Japigo to enable us to deploy Proximie in those environments, those really austere environments, to enable mothers and babies to live and survive and have safe surgical care so patients survive afterwards. And we're over 100 babies now in 5 centres in Makueni County in Kenya, and we're working with the World Health Organization, World Health Assembly to enable us to scale that on a great scale. But not to just focus on the perception that people think that this is something that happens everywhere else. In Wales, for example, the country I'm from in the UK, access to endoscopy for colon cancer and scopes is very limited. In Denmark, there's a year waiting list for access for cluster headaches and really disabling headaches and cluster headaches people can't get access to. In the US and Tennessee, access to pediatric care is really limited. So all of this areas where we're working to provide that access. So I'm keen to emphasize this is a real problem in everywhere, not just.
No, yeah, I mean, healthcare, again, yes, healthcare bottlenecks are a problem all over the world. But just so what in Wales, in your home country, what are you doing to just make it really concrete? What is your solution?
Yeah, so
one
how
block?
we work is that there's not enough people educated to give scopes, so an endoscope that goes down to be able to look at inside and detect cancer. So what we do is we connect an expert endoscopist to trainee endoscopists who are doing more of the volume cases. And when there's a question, they can dial in that remote person, have a discussion, and that patient can get treated there and then. The patient doesn't have to go away, wait, and then come back and have a more experienced person do that. So it shortens the treatment time, enables people to have access to that decision at that point. I can dial in an oncologist, I can dial in a radiographer, I can dial in multiple different people to make that decision there and then. So patients don't go away not knowing what's happened, not knowing the decision, and being really worried about that and having to come back for a second procedure. So there's a financial ROI, there's a very human ROI in that circumstance.
Are you using like augmented reality technology for that? Is that right?
We are, yes, that's right. We're into a range of technologies, and I'd say with augmented reality, as a Welshman who likes NFL, which is a little bit of a strange thing, I like my American football, and augmented reality existed 20, 25 years ago in the NFL. It existed for a long time. The line on the turf existed for the 10-yard line. So we've used technology that's been around, and we use the best available technology in an austere and pragmatic way to enable it to have impact. So yes, you can use a hand and point into the surgical field and let them know what to do and how to do it. Yeah.
Great. So then last warm-up question for you, just the same thing about adoption, right? So, I mean, in general, healthcare has amazing digital applications, but generally is slow to adopt. How's it going for you? What are the kind of challenges to get this technology into Africa, into Wales, and how do you overcome it?
Yeah, that's right. I'm laughing because I'm smiling about Kenya and Wales being together as two countries that I'm talking about, which is great. But it is the alignment. I'll summarize it because in respect of time, the alignment between how the technology is used with medical device regulation, software as a medical device or not, as the case may be, how your infrastructure is built on the back end, the less sexy things that you don't see so much on websites, and how it's built and where that data is stored, which servers used, all of those components is really important. And then what your contract says you do. So aligning those three things takes an incredible amount of time, a lot of cost, and that's where we've been aligning in over these 5 years that we've worked to make sure those three align. If you get them aligned, then when you go to the healthcare environment, you can get adoption at scale. But unless you do that, and bearing in mind you have to do that, it's different in Germany as it is in the UK with Brexit, it's different in the US with HIPAA versus GDPR. So there's security, there's data privacy, and then there's exactly aligning those three components. So I think there's experience, there's learning, and I think there's the cultural adoption. Our final point is COVID did accelerate this process. The comfort with remote working, with technology, all of those from the healthcare system did prove as an accelerant in that process. So that's a good thing.
Always good to hear those silver linings from our years spent locked down.
Sure.
Let's bring David out. Let's get an investor's perspective. So as you see, especially in an emerging technology, it typically takes time and therefore money to get there. So the investor perspective is super important. So David is an MBA alum as well, had been with Outlier Ventures, which is a leading Web3 accelerator and sort of founder community, about a few hundred Web3 founders in that network. He's now currently, I guess, independent, right, David, and doing seed investing. But just from all the experience you've had, how do you think about identifying and supporting early stage projects in this space? Is there something specific that people are aware of?
Totally. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I mean, I think the cool part of being at a startup accelerator, right? Like think like a Y Combinator for the metaverse of sorts, is the applications you see come in are generally 6 to 12 months ahead of the market. And so you're seeing, right, in order to identify an early stage startup, especially in such an edge case industry, right? I think for us, it was the idea first off has to intrigue you, right? You have to be able to look at the idea and be able to think not what's relevant now, but what 12 months from now might be relevant, which is already insane, right, at this pace. Then the conceptual business model, right? I mean, you have to put on your MBA hat to some degree and think like, as wonderful as this all is, and altruism and changing the world is excellent, can this function as a business with your traditional, it still has to exist. And then I think finally, especially on the seed stage, is you have to be impressed by the team, right? You have to look at the team, look at the founders, and besides their resumes, which you'll always see one of those slides on the back of a pitch deck with like the founders and then a smattering of labels on the bottom of banks and schools and whatnot. But besides that, you have to listen to the team and think, do these people impress me? Are these the people that can do this? And so I think that's probably the best bet you can come up with in this industry.
I'm going to start pulling in some of the questions from the chat where relevant. So I think there's one that you could hit, you already touched on, but what are you seeing in terms of emerging business models to monetize metaverse, Web3? Are we going beyond gaming yet? Any thoughts on business model?
Totally. I mean, I think that I focus more on the real, like the open metaverse side, right? I'm farther away from the hardware and the software to a degree, and more about the interoperability, right? And kind of painting this dream. And so I think there's an entire emerging field of tokenomics, right? How can you create a self-sustaining economic system within your application that has the right incentive mechanisms for users, providers, and possibly third-party partners, brands, protocols, whatever it may be. And so there's a real push, and it's, again, like I said, it's big thinking, it's dreaming, but we're starting to see some really smart economic minds and business minds, right, try and craft a model for a company that combines equity, governance, utility, and liquidity at the same time. And so I think if you ask investors 2 years ago what they were interested in, there were some who, let's say, they personally invested in insert a blockchain. So they were interested in double dipping and investing more into those projects, into the ecosystem at the same time. But still, ROI wasn't a thought. And then maybe about a year ago, the market turned and everyone wanted infra, right? Everyone said, we want people actually building something where there can be a business model attributed to it. And if it doesn't exist yet, then we as the investor can guide them in that direction. And I think since that, the market has really the VC market has really sort of slowed down in deployment. Now we're actually seeing people want to, VCs and investors want to fund projects that can show up like, yes, you have your tokenomics model, but how is this going to actually sustain you as a live business? And so it really depends on what you're trying to build, but it's a wild space.
Just on that, so you're seeing some of the funding come back, unfreeze, is that with new criteria? Is that what I understood?
I mean, I think they want to see that your business, not only does it check off the idea box, the conceptual box, and is the team impressive, but they want to see that this can run itself, right? I think the VC fire hose is kind of off. The blitz scaling era is maybe coming to an end. Maybe it'll come back. It's all cycles, but Yeah,
we'll see. Last one for you then. What's your view on how integral do you find blockchain crypto to what you're trying to participate in?
I mean, I really like what I think it was Cameron and Emma who were talking about, these microverses, right? And these purpose-built metaverses, I think is really useful. But for me, I think about, right, the way people talk now about NFTs, crypto, the different chains is like, these are just labels that will eventually fade away when they become an underlying tech stack, right? No one talks about DNS or HTML anymore, or HTTP rather, right? It's like we have these the average user doesn't know how their Bluetooth headphones work. They just know if they put their Bluetooth headphones in, they work, right? And so for me, when we're going to really achieve this usability of this tech, it's going to most likely, in my opinion, it should be on a immutable, transparent ledger, but the average user and the use case should have really nothing to do with it,
Great, Thank you. All right, let me start. We got some great questions coming in. So maybe this one, maybe Emma, you'll kick off on this because you talked about the learning. So Roger's asking, how different are the learning results when comparing classroom learning versus what you're doing with Web3, metaverse, AR, VR? So what's it good for? Could be interesting. What are we learning about learning?
Well, first of all, we have to start with everyone learns in different ways, right? So before we had a lot of just 2D. When we immerse ourselves into a situation, experience something from firsthand, we're engaging more senses. So the learning becomes much more deeper than before. You have a retention about 70% in a virtual reality headset, and that is compared to a classroom or e-learning about 3 to 5%. You can, even in hazardous situations, to be able to train in a safe environment, to be able to have difficult conversations. I truly believe that this technology is the emotion technology. This is that technology where we can bring people together again. So saving costs, have high retention, and making sure that you can use it in both when you're recruiting people to make sure it's the right or not. We have companies using it for everything from hard conversation to cognitive training to see if you're able to work in that environment. So there are huge benefits. And I think, Bryn, you also agree with me that we have just started to tap into this, to have the different senses, to be able to stand in a scenario where you can see how long something is instead of just learning or reading from it. I think that we will have people that haven't been able to work before, that will have new tools to be able to work through these technologies.
Any, Bryn or David, you want to jump in on learning use cases?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think the different learning styles is a really important point as well. I know you made an opening from a healthcare perspective. You can look at different technologies in the virtual reality space. I know also VR, for example, they've got evidence around 2 to 3 times the multiple in terms of output of learning using virtual reality in isolation. There's companies called Precision OS out there who are doing it collaboratively, so similar sort of results, but working in a virtual reality space collaboratively around surgery. And another called Fundamental Virtual Reality, which uses more haptics in terms of virtual reality with haptics, and they're getting similar results, albeit a different sort of a different group, a cohort that they were looking at. But all of those in healthcare, the people that they were focusing on were the early stage learners. So again, I think the different stage of learning that you're at, we see them for us complementary, that they get people who are early in surgery, following the steps of the surgery in a linear way. When you get to the reality of surgery, it's very different. You normally go in a sort of circular motion because you sometimes take a step back. I think it's isolated to when that impact can happen, but that is far more effective financially and impactful than the way in which we used to do it, was ship everything out and have, bones that were sent to people and various different ways of doing it, which is very rudimentary and old fashioned. So yeah, certainly seeing that.
Maybe I'll share briefly some of the INSEAD experiences. We're pushing hard on this. So interesting, we don't see it necessarily as a substitute. So we actually use VR in classroom learning. So we're using it to replace the paper case. Instead of imagining yourself running the company, actually put on the headset and do that. Just to emphasize what Emma says, learning needs to be active. People are always asking, why don't you just use a video? But if you think about video, it's very passive. The director tells you where to look. The great thing about VR is you're sitting in a boardroom, you choose where to look. There's also heat maps coming off. So we actually know on average, how much time did the class spend looking at the CEO versus the other people in the room. And you can do lots of fun things with the technology once you get into it. Emma, did you have your hand up? Or
no, I lowered it again.
Okay, that's fine. Maybe I'd like to explore a little bit interactions with other technologies. So I see someone asking about NFTs. So clearly NFTs are part of this space. Then maybe we'll talk about AI in a second. But just on the whole NFT part of this, maybe, I don't know, again, Emma, if you want to kick off, when you work with brands, how excited are people still around NFTs? Is that part of what you still look to do?
Well, I don't know. I can start off just quickly saying that we have seen that it isn't as interesting that I think it was a couple of years ago. But I think also that the market was very big and almost too big to handle. I think that it's also too soon to see where this is going. So we are not working that much with the NFT space at the moment.
Yeah. David, what's your sort of view on these kind of assets?
Totally. So I think that NFTs, right, are more of again, it's an underlying tech layer, right? So I think what we saw with NFTs in the last 2 years when it comes to, the profile picture projects is what I always used to say is like the equivalent of imagine giving people the first airplane, right, 300 years ago, and they're driving up and down the runway really fast. And everyone is so impressed that this vehicle can drive up and down the runway really fast. And the way I kind of look at it is like, wait till you see what that thing can actually do, right? And so I think if we think about NFTs as utilities, right? And people want tangible use cases now, like not monkey pictures. So a good one is NFT ticketing, right? Like think about the ticketing space. if you think about the ticketing experience for a music festival, for example, right? Like you have these monopoly players who control everything. The tech is a little bit outdated. The festival producers are really kind of bound to what, a large ticketing company wants them to do, and the users are stuck paying fees out of their mind. And so if we were to just change the underlying tech of these concert tickets or festival tickets to NFTs, what would happen? Well, the festivals, right, you'd have like reduced scalping because there's authenticity tracking of all the tickets because it's on chain, right? Royalties of resales could go back to the producer of the festival instead of guys selling it on the streets. You get tech-enabled benefits, revenue channels, right? So there's your festival producer. The user, right, can authenticate that the ticket they have is actually going to get them into the event instead of showing up in the hopes that it doesn't. Maybe the ticket has a sort of proof of attendance commemorative aspect to it that actually has utility, because if they go to multiple festivals with this same ticketing, with the same festival, they can sort of earn perks, right? And then they can resell the benefits of that ticket on any open marketplace, right? And so that's your user, your festival done. Brands who come in, right? Like if you want to be a brand that sponsors a festival, you all of a sudden have a CRM system that refreshes itself based on how often these NFT tickets are sold. You can layer your loyalty points on top, and there's multiple touch points. So what I've just described to you is a utility case for NFT in which the user doesn't know anything about NFTs, and nor is it that person's responsibility. They just need better.
Do I need an
experience.
OpenSea account, David? Do I need an OpenSea?
Exactly, right? And so that's, it really has the technology to do so. But again, I think that it's not the job of the user to really care about the underlying element the same way your Bluetooth headphones work.
Very clear. One other, the hottest part of tech today is clearly generative AI. We're all trying to wrap our heads around it. Does anybody have a point of view on the interaction between generative AI and those breakthroughs, what that might mean to Web3 and the metaverse? David, you're nodding your head, so why don't you give any early thoughts? We won't hold you accountable.
Of course. I think when you look at generative AI and GPT and the strides it's taking, it feels to me like, imagine we saw an alien meteor crash on Earth, right? And it crashed, it's there, it's glowing in different colors. I think like everyone is standing around it, looking at it, knowing that this is about to change the entire paradigm of our existence, but no one really wants to stake a claim on what it is or actually can tell you what it is because it just landed on the ground. And so for me, I just think that like, pay attention to it, right? It's getting plenty of attention, but like it needs even more attention because the changes are going to happen quicker than we know, and no one actually knows how. So that's what I'll say about it.
Any hypothesis for what this could do around metaverse? Again, this could obviously make it easier to generate metaverses, right? It could do. Anyone? I don't know. Emma, you're nodding now. So any thought when you're looking at generative AI? What do you at least hypothesis might you have?
No, but I totally agree with David. I think we're just in the beginning of looking at this new alien thing. But what I think is very important is to start having these discussions of how we're building it, what it's going to be used for, who is building it, and so forth. We can already see the backsides of something. Now we have filters that is generated by artificial intelligence, making women have dysmorphia, and all of these things that keep coming out of this. I think we need to really make sure that we know what we're doing, but I'm not sure if we will ever know until it's too late.
Yuval Harari, the guy from Sapiens said the generative AI is like nuclear was to the physical world to the virtual world. That is, it's going to create. It's hugely disruptive. Could potentially destroy a lot if we're not careful. Bryn, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things. David, I loved what you said about the NFT and that example in ticketing. It's fascinating. I think that application to healthcare, when you look at all of our personal data and our personal information and the access to that and how you could apply the same principle, I thought your example was really helpful getting me to think in those sort of ways. So thank you for sharing that. I thought it was great. And I love the way you paint the picture of the alien sort of, generative AI. From our perspective, just quickly from health tech, what we've seen and we've tried already and people are looking at is operation notes for surgery. So when you do a surgery, you write up some operation notes afterwards, and then you put it into the notes. Surgeons' handwriting, I hope they don't mind me saying, it tend to be not very good. They tend to be brief. They tend to be pretty repetitive in terms of what they write. So the detail is lost. for us, obviously having video and audio in there, one of the amazing things is that audio transcript. So we've taken some audio transcript, de-identified them and make them okay, checked with the surgeon and everything in terms of compliance and regulatory, and we've put them into chat GPT to see what the output was. And then we had different versions that we went back to that surgeon and said, which one of these is yours? Which one of the ones is written by me and someone else, you know, and then layman, and then someone by chat GPT, and they scored them. This was anecdotal, so very early and anecdotal. But the chat GPT was as good. It was like 8 out of 10 was being marked consistently in terms of taking that verbiage. So the benefit really is, could you just take the transcript that's written, automatically populate that into the patient notes, surgeon checks, signs off quite rightly so, and you get a more comprehensive view that then is easier to read in text. Subsequently, when you're discharging that patient, the person reading it has more detail about what happens, and you can connect it with the raw file of audio and visual if you wanted to check anything. So again, and if you build that on, you know, in terms of blockchain and how you would do that, is a fascinating move forward. So I think it's, you know, my board said to me when I met with them a couple of weeks ago, sometimes I can be an optimist. I like to think I'm a pragmatist. Maybe I'm a little optimistic on this front, but you know, there's certainly applications that we're seeing, and people are already playing around a little bit to it. Where that takes us, we don't know. And the other part that was interesting is Microsoft acquired a company called Nuance a few years ago, 2020, I think it was, the audio, you know, NLP company, and obviously with ChatGPT and that being medical, the partnership with Mayo Clinic. That's a very interesting space in terms of emergent potential technology that could come to the fore.
Great. I want to pick up on something Emma brought up, which is around the responsible use of technology. I think post some of the carnage around social media and the addictive algorithms and you know the negatives of that, I think anyone with a new technology owes it to the world to think about this. Both, again, I think Emma, you were saying, how do we use this for good? And I think you do work on sustainability, but then also I think we should all exchange a little bit on responsibility. How do we avoid downsides? But Emma, I don't know, Emma, you brought this up. So do you want to elaborate a little bit from Warpin's perspective, how this comes up in your work?
No, but to David's point, we're having our eyes, you know, very far in the future. And if you look back on the technology that we have had, we did this one time before, and it was the internet, it was the PC, it was everything that happened back then. And I mean, the same problems that we're facing online, they will follow us into the metaverse if we don't think differently. And the same problems will be enhanced because that's the very nature of the metaverse. So I think we have this window of opportunity where we can start looking at those problems that we kind of missed with the smartphone, I believe. I think it really dawned us. And I think that we have lost a whole generation of how to communicate with people. So it would be nice to see inventions that will relearn people how to communicate and really use this space for getting a connection with people again.
Do you see in the deal flow that you're looking at, David, do you see, are people learning from some of the negatives that sort of Emma was sketching out? Are they thinking about how you might have, I don't know, more satisfying interactions here? What are you seeing?
I mean, I think we've seen over the last few years, like the Web3 community building for Web3, right? Web3 for Web3. And so a lot of the tech you've seen is still very self-effacing or self-centered, yeah, right? In the non-pejorative sense. And so I think, last year the narrative was like, how do we onboard the next billion users? And that's still, I haven't seen it done effectively yet. I have some projects that I'm working with that are doing a really good job. But I agree with what Emma was saying, is that like, we haven't even fixed the problems with, like, big tech has so much power and money and a simultaneous incentive to sort of maximize their shareholder value through keeping eyeballs on the platform, but also they want the public to be happy and good. I would like to think they have an amount of altruism, plus it makes for a better business audience. And so I mean, if I had the answer for it, I would be probably doing it myself. But it's I think a lot of it falls on our colleagues and our friends and our fellow MBA and INSEAD alum who work in big tech to really take a stance.
Actually, David, you're sort of a advocate of the true metaverse, interoperable and stuff. One of the challenges now is, especially with metaverse, but also probably Apple when they come out, everyone wants to control. I mean, the whole game is to have the next iOS, right? That's the $1 trillion opportunity. And there's a huge as you said, a lot of power and money that's going to go into controlling the metaverse, which, you know, is at odds with sort of the open internet, as it were. Do you have a sort of view on whether some of the more dispersed community is going to be able to challenge big tech?
I mean, I can paint a picture of the vision I would like to see happen, but I do think that, like, look, it comes down to like continuing to work with the regulators in a way that works, right? I think regulation is a necessity. It doesn't have to be inherently the regulation that people pose. But I do think that we as a society have gotten so comfortable with free technology like Gmail and Facebook and whatnot at the cost of our own user data, unaware of the value of our own user data. And I think educating everyone that the reality is your data, which is so important in your life, for people who spend hours and hours and hours a day on their phones, for a young generation that doesn't differentiate between its online friends and its school friends and its home friends, like, this is all data. And until we as a cohesive unit recognize the value in that, and that we can paint a reality where we control it, which I know it's crazy to think, but it's possible. We just need to decide that that's what we want to do. And so I'll keep on trying to bring that to reality and hope that everyone does the same.
Cameron, did I see you had your hand up? Did you want to jump in a little bit?
Yeah, it was.
You're on mute.
Yeah. Am I still on mute? Sorry. Yeah, it was kind of to expand upon the idea of sort of security and how we're going forward with not making the same mistakes we made with the internet. One of the things I just wanted to add was I mentioned, and I guess my section of the presentation, that hardware is currently the biggest roadblock. But the second highest one, the second, I guess, polled answer and Family Feud is going to be is the security. A lot of people are really concerned about this, but also because people are concerned, people are working on it. And kind of going back to David and Bryn's point about using NFTs in creative ways as kind of a back-end technology, that is one of the solutions that a lot of the people we talked to have suggested. Was the idea of you have sort of an NFT, but that NFT is linked to your specific identity, and therefore it provides traceability for things like harassment and those kinds of things. And
I'll jump in for just to jump in on one sec, is that, like, decentralized identity is something that people have been working on for 10 years, right? And these are concepts that, while they've been sort of concepts, like we have teams and projects actually building this that I think can make the difference. And so we're seeing it happen live. And so it seems like the ticketing one exists, right? It's called lemonade.social. And there are people out there actually building it. We just need to, like, keep them going. And then we need the like of Bryn and Emma to like bring the mainstream world on board with this. And so it's great to talk about this stuff.
I'm going to start. We've got about 10 more minutes left. So let's maybe at the end, let's be quite maybe forward looking. So if people, any of the topics that have come up, what are you expecting in terms of hardware improvements over what time horizon? When might you get to 1 billion users? What about regulation? But anyway, just will we, is Web3 the right label? Is that so a number of things have come up, but anyone want to pull out a hazy crystal ball and make some thoughts about what you're expecting? Bryn, maybe you first.
Yeah, happy to. The vision I've got and the horizon I've got, I'm fascinated by the fellow panelists and their views as well. I think for me, what initially the surprising thing for me from a marketing background perspective was the phrase metaverse and the organization Meta. So this, even in our discussion, the time we discussion preparing for today, we were talking about Web3 as a different concept. So fascinating in terms of the branding and labeling and how that is perceived. And I think we've already covered, the sort of virtual world versus that augmented reality complementary world and learning together. So I'd see in that 5 and 10 years time, a lot of the things that we've discussed exist. I absolutely think that irrespective of the changes in big companies, maybe the lack of investment and the layoffs and the pressure they've got from shareholders, I still think that innovator's dilemma will exist for SMEs, for major companies, that if they don't do it, someone else will. And David Roll has multiple different VCs out there that will go forward. And I think that once, the macroeconomic environment, as that cycle inevitably keeps turning and unfolding, and we're seeing it now with a slowdown in 12 months, people still have venture capital to place, money still there and available. Yes, it's a little bit harder to get hold of. And yes, the discussions regarding business model innovation and around that's really important. But I just see this accelerating, continue to accelerate, and what we all want is those tangible use cases that solve problems now, that are aligned to a mission that's very real, that then people continue to build on. Because if it ends up being too conceptual, too fantastical, too future horizon, gazing, I don't think we're ever going to get those first steps. So my plea to everyone is think about that mission that really aligns to your value and your values and what you want to do. Deliver something incrementally, and then when you get good enough, it's exactly this cross the innovator's dilemma. Then go big and go in that way. But it makes it so much easier getting up in the morning and being part of all this if you've got a mission that you're aligned to. So really enjoyed the discussion and learned through the process. So that's my view. It's not probably as fantastical as some others or as forward thinking, but maybe I'm being a bit pragmatic in this occasion.
No, I think just to connect with what David said, one of the good things about the tech environment today is you need to bring it down to concrete use cases and really how you're going to impact in the near term. So I think it's pretty healthy. Emma, some thoughts on where this could go over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I have this positive picture that I'm painting in my own head because we were one of the first developers in Europe for Magic Leap, and we went there in the beginning. And I really loved what Ronnie, the founder, said, that we're building technology to free up more time to be with the ones that we love. So I love to see this technology for helping me getting more time in this life, but also making sure that I can attend the meetings, I can do the things that I need to do. So I'm really excited for having these technologies in my home and being able to do much more with them. So I believe we're just seeing in the beginning, remind ourselves of the last technological revolution that we were in and how that went. We are in a business-to-business area right now where it's working and solving problems. And I think that will be still in a couple of years. But, if Apple releases a headset that will have great content on it, I think, and great applications, then I think we will have mass adoption a bit earlier.
Yeah, we're all watching and waiting. David?
No, I mean, I'm just really thankful, right, to hear from Bryn and Emma that I get to spend my time up in the clouds, right, dealing with ideas and concepts and plans for the future and helping seed those ideas. But it's the work that they're doing and that other people in the space are doing to actually bring it down to reality and give, be the people on the ground willing to sort of educate, traditional business leaders and traditional consumers on this kind of technology and the real actual improvement. And once you shed the labels and move away from the grifting and the shilling and the volatility of all the sort of news, that there are use cases and there's a reason why your brand or your city or your, whatever it is, community should have this technology. So it's good.
I'm feeling like we're getting to a good closure. I think, we could go down another rabbit hole, but I think this really helped probe some of the territory. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Cameron, for kicking us off. Thanks, Bryn and Emma and David for the insights. One thing I take away for the Digital INSEAD team, I think the education use case, I think we want to also continue the conversation by use case. I think everyone echoed education is a fascinating one. So anyway, if you're listening in and you have ideas for speakers and companies we should approach on education, we will probably do something on that in the months ahead. But again, big thank you. Thanks for tuning in. If you haven't done it already, look at the INSEAD Learning Hub, INSEAD in your pocket, great new app where we take all sorts of insights from faculty and alumni and other business leaders and sort of feed it up, because as we heard today, the world is changing way too fast. And we all need to keep up to speed with what's going on. So again, a big thank you for our speakers. You guys are really at the frontier, and thanks for giving us a bit of a vision for what's going on. David, good to have you back at INSEAD, even if virtually. All right, over and out from Fontainebleau, France, everyone. Have a good end of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.